But the committee is constantly talking about the importance of eye test. Eye test, eye test, eye test. It feels like this committee, even more so than years past, is valuing eye test more so than they are head-to-head results, which is a little uncomfortable, if you want me to be completely honest. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we are so happy to have you here with us tonight. It is a rankings release show special. We do this every single week, so I guess it's not that special. It's week 12, but it is college football playoff committee ranking number 2. So it's time to get into it. I just got off the set. We just broke it down, talked about it for about an hour, but there are definitely a few teams that we have not had much of an opportunity to hit. We will do it here tonight. We ask you always, guys, to on the days that we're doing playoff committee shows, please submit questions. We want to hear from you. We have several of your questions that are in. You can do it on our social media platform. You can also do it on my social media platform, at Greg McElroy, at Always CFB. We'll read those. We'll make sure that those make the show. We also always encourage you guys to go and submit questions to our email at alwayscollegefootball@gmail.com. Whatever it is you guys want to do, we will go there with y'all. So we always appreciate being able to do this with you guys and really kind of dive in just a touch deeper and go through why the committee did this, why the committee did this, some of the things I'd be really frustrated with tonight if I were a fan. Because to me, I think the committee messed up last week. They made it right tonight, but if I'm a fan, I'm having a hard time understanding some of the justifications that they've given me. I will go through some of those. I will also tell you a couple teams right now that are not currently within striking distance of the college football playoff, but I think they're in a really good spot. I also, and we're one of the only shows that does this, I'm going to tell you why it's very important, why some of these teams are ranked where they're at right now, because it gives them a great shot to not just have a home playoff game, but maybe an outside shot to get one of those first round buys. So a lot that we need to get to before we do. Kindly ask all of you guys to go and subscribe to the podcast, or if you get the podcast, and check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. All right, let's dive in. Our reaction to the second version of the College Football Playoff Committee rankings. Ohio State's number 1, no problem there, right? Nothing really to write home about. Another dominant performance last weekend. They continued to have kind of a stranglehold on all of college football. And if you look at just some of the metrics that support where they're at right now, there's everybody is basically looking up at Ohio State. They are number 3 in strength of record, which is very, very good. Number 1 in game control, which means they're dominating everybody they play. But the strength of schedule is sitting at currently number 41. Which is a little bit different, and frankly, it actually fell off last week's performance. So it's not their fault that the rest of the Big Ten is not living up to the standard that Ohio State is currently setting, but Michigan still sits in the top 25. That's another ranked win that Ohio State can get to only further strengthen where they're at, and then, of course, in the Big Ten title game, they'll be in fine shape. They're almost, I think, guaranteed at this point at least a first-round bye if they just hold serve throughout the regular season, regardless of what happens in the Big Ten title. Indiana at number 2 versus A&M at number 3. I actually thought this was going to be a time when the committee would actually put A&M in front of Indiana. A couple things I liked hearing from the committee. Number 1, A&M dominated. No denying that. But they did so against a backup quarterback. The committee took that into account. That, I think, is impactful. And we've already seen at times in this ranking where that hasn't been taken into account. We'll talk about Utah here in just a little bit. But they cited, hey, we're going to keep Indiana where they're at, even though it was a narrow victory on the road in a hostile setting against a very, very below average football team, but still with talent. But A&M, yes, you won convincingly, but it was against a backup. We're going to still hold that against you, and we're going to keep Indiana just in front of you. And then at the same time, if you're going to cite, well, the team you played against was without some pieces, you also have to acknowledge that Indiana was without some pieces. They're without Elijah Surratt. They're without their left guard. They're without a guy on their left tackle spot. Like, they had guys that were out of the lineup, and yet they still found a way to win when they had their less than stellar self. So I think the coaches and the players in that room are probably emphasizing the challenge of having to go into an environment like that, one team's last gasp, and you get taken to the wire, but you find a way. So I'm sure that's why Indiana's where they're at, why A&M's where they're at. I'm perfectly fine with it. I'd have Indiana at 3, A&M at 2, but we're kind of splitting hairs. Bama at 4, Georgia at 5. Nothing to really talk about there, especially with Bama having the head-to-head. If Georgia, for example, goes out and stomps Texas this weekend, Could Georgia make a case to jump Alabama if Alabama maybe just narrowly avoids an upset against Oklahoma? Maybe. But the committee is constantly talking about the importance of eye test. Eye test, eye test, eye test. Feels like this committee, even more so than years past, is valuing eye test more so than they are head-to-head results, which is a little uncomfortable. If you want me to be completely honest, I'll cite a million examples throughout this top 25 in which the head-to-head was ignored. One, Notre Dame and Miami, same record, head-to-head ignored. Notre Dame's at 9, Miami's at 15. Miami and Louisville, Miami's at 15, Louisville's at 20. Miami lost to Louisville on their home field, and yet there's still a gap between the two because the committee is looking at the eye test. Plenty of examples, though, too, where they acknowledge the head-to-head result. Bama beat Georgia. Georgia beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat Oklahoma. Texas beat Oklahoma. They both sit right in front. BYU beat Utah. BYU's right in front. Virginia beat Louisville. They sit right in front. So there's plenty of examples in which the head-to-head matters. USC's in front of Michigan. Another example there. So the head-to-head matters most of the time, but not all the time. So that's worth watching here when we start talking about home field advantage and we start talking about who gets that coveted number 4 seed so you can get that last spot in the bye. Looking at number 6, Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech had a strong case to be made to jump up into the top 5 in this week's rankings. Now, I understand keeping them behind Bama. I understand keeping them behind Georgia, partly because of strength of schedule. Right now, their strength of schedule is 48. That's why. You look at Bama's, you look at Georgia's strength of schedule, for example, is 11. Alabama's strength of schedule is sitting there at number 6. Meanwhile, Texas Tech, they sit in the low 40s. So for them to jump in front of 1, maybe 2 of those SEC teams was kind of hard to wrap their head around, but they did jump in front of Ole Miss, who was victorious last week, and I agreed with the move. Why? Because Ole Miss's strength of schedule is not nearly as impressive as Georgia and Alabama. Ole Miss's strength of schedule after a Citadel win last week, not really challenging yourself in the non-conference. Their strength of schedule played is currently sitting at 32. They do have a good win against Tulane, a good win against Oklahoma, deservingly in the top 7, but I don't think it should have been enough to hold off Texas Tech. So therefore, Texas Tech jumping in front of them, totally good with that. Oregon moving up just 1 spot, I thought was interesting as well. I thought Oregon, after going on the road, comparable situation to what we saw with Indiana, they survived against a really good opponent, against a team that's currently ranked in the top 21. I thought that might be enough to vault Oregon over Ole Miss as well. And why does that matter? Because Oregon is right now holding that last home playoff game. If they could get in front of Ole Miss, that would give them just a little bit of cushion. They might not need it, though, with a still very difficult stretch of the season coming up. They still have to play SC at home. SC is ranked in the top 17. So Oregon's in a good spot, but I think they cut a case to be made to be moved up just a little bit more. After all, Oregon's strength of schedule is actually better than that of Ole Miss. Their strength of schedule is at 24. Ole Miss is at 32, like I just referenced. So I thought Oregon should probably move up to 7. Ole Miss moved down to 8, but splitting hairs just a little bit there. Notre Dame sitting at 9. We'll group these 3 together. Notre Dame, Texas, and Oklahoma. Now, Notre Dame has given me more consistent performance. We've talked about that last week. I have no problem with the committee acknowledging the improvements that Notre Dame has made, and also Notre Dame lost 2 games by narrow margins. Very narrow margins, right? And we have seen the committee reward teams that play teams tight and lose. We've seen Iowa be a beneficiary of that. They moved just 1 spot after a loss last week, and rightfully. They looked really good in defeat. So if you're competitive in your losses, they're not going to crush you. That's evidenced by where Notre Dame's at right now. The question with Notre Dame, they get a win this week on the road at Pitt, potentially. That's big because that could further vault them into the top 8, which would give them that home playoff game in South Bend. So they need to get a win this week. That goes without saying. They lose, they're probably on the outside looking in altogether when it comes to college football playoff candidacy. But here's the problem with Notre Dame. Their strength of schedule down the stretch. Pitt's ranked, so that's helpful. Notre Dame currently has played the 30th ranked strength of schedule. Pretty good, not bad, comparable to that of Oregon, comparable to that of Ole Miss that sit right in front of them. The problem is they have one more loss than Oregon and Ole Miss. The other thing that's problematic too, let's use Texas, who's sitting right behind them. Texas has a lot of horsepower remaining on their schedule, meaning if Texas gets a win this week at Georgia, I think in all likelihood, regardless of what Notre Dame does at Pitt, Texas with a win at Georgia could vault them in front of the Fighting Irish. What about Oklahoma, who sits right behind Texas at number 11? Well, they play on the road at Alabama. They go on the road and get a win against the top 4 team. That might be enough to jump in front of Notre Dame. So I think they're appropriately ranked right now. But if I'm Notre Dame, I'm concerned. I need to be rooting for chalk to fly in the SEC. I need Georgia to beat Texas, and I need Alabama to beat Oklahoma if I want to be assured of a home playoff spot. Because right now, I think they're at the mercy of what happens with the teams right behind them. We'll go next to BYU and Utah. Utah is, I think, probably the team that I have the toughest time justifying their ranking of all the teams ranked in the top 25. And this is no disrespect to Utah. I think they're a really good football team. I think they're vastly improved. But what did we just talk about a moment ago when describing teams getting credit for losing close? Well, Utah is not getting credit for that. Utah got beat badly by Texas Tech. Guess what? So did BYU. That's perfectly fine. But BYU currently sits there with a win against Utah, which is very impressive. And Utah's best win at the moment is against a 7-2 Cincinnati team who is in the top 25. And yes, that win was really convincing. Other than that, they beat an Arizona State team without their quarterback. So remember, we just talked about, well, A&M doesn't get credit for beating Missouri without their quarterback. Well, Utah beat Arizona State without their quarterback, and yet they're getting credit for that performance. That's something I think that we need to get some clarity on here moving forward. Looking at that, though, BYU did beat Utah. They should be in front. And BYU, I still think, has a very real chance. However, with some of the things they have down the stretch, they still have TCU, who's not ranked, but still a good football team. They're at home this week. They get a win there. Does that do much for their resume? Probably not, understanding who's right in front of them. But with Texas and Oklahoma as a heavy dog this weekend, if those two teams lose, then BYU's back in the at-large spot potentially. They're sitting at number 10, assuming they get a win against TCU at home this weekend. Then they go to Cincinnati. They get that win. They're likely going to Dallas to play in the Big 12 title, where they'll get another opportunity to play against Texas Tech Red Raiders. So I think BYU is in a really good spot right now. The committee did penalize them because they were not competitive this past weekend. They didn't penalize them enough to where they could find themselves on the outside looking in of the college football playoff. We'll go next to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt right now, I think, needs a bit of a prayer. They lost to Texas. So in the event in which Texas loses another one, would Texas drop below Vanderbilt? Probably not, because if you watch the first 3 quarters of that football game, it was not super competitive. So I think Texas, regardless of the circumstances, will probably fall no further than 14 in the event in which they lose this weekend to Georgia, which would have them in front of Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has to go out. They got to win the rest of their games naturally, and they got to stomp Tennessee. If they stomp Tennessee, maybe they have an outside chance because Tennessee currently still sits in the top 25. But not looking good for Vanderbilt. I think they're at the mercy of what happens around them. Can they make it in? Yes, but not on their own accord. We'll go next to Miami. Probably the biggest correction of the week based on last week. Now, Miami is the beneficiary of chaos happening in the ACC. With Virginia's loss and Louisville's loss, the committee is basically saying all these ACC teams are flawed. They're all flawed. And we can't just use head-to-head as an indicator of who's the best team. We have to go with, on their best day, who is the best team in the ACC. That's what I think they're doing. That's why I think this ranking is the way it is. You have Miami at 15, Georgia Tech at 16. Georgia Tech's strength of schedule is what's holding them back right now. But the good news for Georgia Tech is they still have a win potentially against Pitt at home, and they still have a chance to play against Georgia in the non-conference. So their strength of schedule right now at 79 is going to strengthen greatly here in the next couple of weeks. So if I'm Georgia Tech, yeah, I'm frustrated at the moment, but I'm not worried about it because either way, I win and take care of business in the ACC. I win the title. I'm going to be in the college football playoff regardless. But if I'm Georgia Tech, I still want to beat Georgia badly, not just because it's my rival, but because it actually keeps my hopes alive for an at-large spot in the event in which chaos happens right in front of me. So Georgia Tech in a really good spot. Virginia and Louisville sit at 19 and 20. Now, if you look at these two teams' metrics, now I know Louisville has the win against Miami, tremendously impressive performance. They also have a big win against James Madison, who's not currently ranked in the top 25, but is among the best G5 teams in the country. Everyone's operating under that same accord. They also have a good win against Pitt. Pitt currently sits at 22. So Louisville has 3 wins right now against quality competition, very quality competition. Let's go next to Virginia so we can help kind of wrap all this around. Virginia has a win against Louisville, but that's about it. So the one thing that's keeping them in front of the Cardinals is that win in the head-to-head. Meanwhile, you have Miami. And by the way, the strength of schedule played for Virginia, not good. It's in the 90s. So they, from a strength of schedule standpoint, really have nothing to stand on. Louisville's strength of schedule is sitting at 63, so very impressive relative to Georgia Tech, who's at 79, and Virginia, who's in the 90s. Let's go to Miami, just so we can put all these together. Miami's strength of schedule is at 39. So when you look at strength of schedule, remember there is an extra level of weight being applied to strength of schedule this year. It's understandable that with Miami sitting at 39 and their next closest counterpart in the ACC sitting 25 spots below them, it's understandable that Miami would get the benefit of the doubt. And you look at their talent profile and all the coaches on that roster probably looking there saying, man, that offensive and defensive line, no one else in the ACC has that. So we'll put them in front right now in a lesser of many evils type of conversation. SC is a fascinating case right now. They are in a great spot. They're sitting there at 17, so it feels like they're a long way out, but I actually think SC controls their own destiny. A win this week against Iowa will probably vault them past the 2, maybe the 3 teams sitting right in front of them. They beat Iowa. I think they could get in front of Georgia Tech. I think they could get in front of Miami. I think they could get in front of Vanderbilt, who sit 14, 15, and 16. So a win this weekend probably takes SC up into the number 14 spot at worst. And that's operating on the assumption that Texas and Oklahoma win. So if Texas and Oklahoma lose, they could drop down, which could vault SC even higher. So SC's in a great spot there. And then they get an opportunity the following week to go to Oregon to play against the Oregon Ducks, who are sitting at number 8. If Oregon and Iowa get beat by SC, SC is going to skyrocket into probably the top 10. At worst, the top 11 or 12, depending on what else happens with the team sitting right in front of them. So I think SC is in a phenomenal place right now. And understandably, they have strength of schedule of 27. They have good quality strength of record. They have good game control, and they have a couple good wins, Michigan being the best. But if they win these next 2, things look really good for the Trojans going forward. Michigan, everyone keeps talking about Michigan finding their way to the college football playoff as an at-large. I think it's going to be very much dependent on, well, if they beat Ohio State, they're probably going to be in a really good spot, but they're also going to need SC to lose one. Because SC and Michigan, their profiles are not that dissimilar. They also need Oklahoma to lose one as well. So if Oklahoma wins out the rest of the way, who are you taking? Michigan as an at-large or Oklahoma as an at-large? Well, in that scenario, you're probably taking the head-to-head. Oklahoma won that game. They're in Norman in the second week of the season. So Michigan needs a little help, but it all starts with beating Ohio State in the final week of the regular season. 21 through 25, Iowa at 21. I was pleased to see that the committee did not drop them too far. They played a good game last week against a good team, and they lost at the buzzer. I didn't want to see them drop out of the top 25. I think a slight adjustment down to 21 is perfectly fine. Pitt sitting at 22. It's all on the table for Pitt right now. They still host Miami in the final game of the regular season, and they have Notre Dame this weekend. If they can get a win against Notre Dame, then how far does Notre Dame fall? And does Pitt potentially vault in front of the Fighting Irish? More than likely they will, depending on how things work out with the Fighting Irish moving forward. Tennessee's at 23, kind of a placeholder. I don't see a scenario where they can actually get to within striking distance. South Florida, the top G5 team, not a surprise. But the G5 is still very much wide open because it has to go to a conference champion, remember? So it's one of 3 teams for the most part in the AAC. You have South Florida, you have Tulane, and you have North Texas. Well, South Florida dominated North Texas a couple weeks ago. So they should be way in front of North Texas right now, but North Texas can still potentially find their way in to the AAC Championship. And if they get that win, they're probably going to the college football playoff as well. And then don't sleep on James Madison, who's just quietly navigating throughout the weeds right now. James Madison's in a pretty good spot, but their strength of schedule sits at 120 or 115. So they're going to be completely at the mercy of what happens in the G5 with the American Conference. So that's about it. Cincy sits at 25. That rounds out the top 25. Not a whole lot to add on Cincy, but they can still make it to the Big 12 title game if they beat BYU at home and handle their business from this point forward. They can be a one-loss Big 12 team and go take their chances against the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Like always, you guys submit questions, and we have our wonderful crew here at ACF to ask me those questions. I wish at some point maybe we'll have some type of live version of this show, and we can actually take calls and we can have a conversation. That'd be amazing, but we're not there yet. We, however, will always have an access point to y'all via our social media platform. This is Jack Foster. This is Mark Kubiak, also known as Kubes. This is known as Jack, not the other Jack, just Jack. Tennessee Jack, Ohio State Jack. Kubes is a diehard Notre Dame fan and is trying to figure out ways to provide bulletin board material for the Irish on our podcast. So we'll open it up, but today we're not starting with Kubiak today. We'll save his Notre Dame propaganda for later, but let's start with Jack. Where are we going, Jack?
Yeah, big topic on Twitter tonight if you're reading about college football playoff rankings reaction, and it kind of builds off the point you were talking about Notre Dame earlier in your monologue. So looking ahead to this week, these big road games for Oklahoma and Texas, say they both win them, obviously in the rankings next week, they'll be firmly entrenched in the top 10. So my focus here with this question is just, where do you see the chips falling in next week's rankings if those upsets happen between Georgia and Alabama, how far they would fall in relation to Oregon and Notre Dame's ranking? How do you think the pecking order would end up being there?
Well, I think it's really fascinating because the committee, like we talked about a little earlier in the show, they are not all in on head-to-head, as evidenced by some of the things they've given us so far. Yes, they clearly acknowledge head-to-head. Yes, it's heavily weighted, but it's not the end-all, be-all. So in the scenario where Oklahoma beats Alabama, does it mean that Oklahoma absolutely with 100% certainty has to be in front of Alabama? Perhaps in previous committees, that would have been the number one differentiator. So in that scenario, Alabama would drop to 8. Oklahoma would be at 7. If Texas beats Georgia, Texas would be in front of Georgia. Now, this committee, with what we've been shown, it's not necessarily a guarantee that that's the case. I still think in likelihood it probably would be. So with as much as Alabama and Georgia have accomplished this year, I still think a home playoff game and or a first round bye is on the ropes this weekend. It's on the line this weekend. If they want to be assured of a home game and or a first round bye, this weekend is a must win. I still think with the loss, they're comfortably in the field, but a first round bye is the ultimate goal. A home playoff game is a secondary goal. So I think if that were to go down, Notre Dame would be jumped immediately by Texas and Oklahoma, and I could also see a scenario where they jump Oregon as well. I think Oregon would actually be in a spot there where they could fall down just a bit, but you also need to acknowledge, how does Ole Miss factor into all this as well? Ole Miss sits there with one loss in the SEC, but they've also played the 32nd ranked strength of schedule. In the SEC, that's among the weaker strength of schedules in the league. So you would then have 5 teams from the SEC likely ranked in the top 8, which what order would it ultimately go in? No clue. But I don't think that's a good scenario for Oregon. I don't think that's a good scenario for Notre Dame if their goal is to get a home playoff game, because right now it's not looking likely that Oregon's going to make it to the Big Ten title, given what's sitting right in front of them.
So would you still say Notre Dame controls its own destiny to make the college football playoff? Because if that chaos happens in the SEC and you have those 6 teams, like, is Notre Dame the odd man out because of, Oregon still playing USC, all these things? Does Notre Dame control their own destiny, you think?
I think Notre Dame is still comfortably in the field. I think the team that would stand to suffer the most from this scenario would be a second Big 12 team. So in that scenario, you would have at least 2 Big Ten teams. Oregon, I think, would still have strong resume points, assuming they beat SC, assuming they go to Washington and win that game. So I still think Oregon is in a really good spot. So the Big Ten would then, in that scenario, have 3. The SEC, I think, would have 5. Who would fall out, potentially, is the tough question.
Right,
because you might be making the decision between Alabama, who beat Georgia. Georgia would then have a win against Georgia Tech in the non-con, which would be beneficial. You also would remove any possibility of an at-large ACC team. You would remove any possibility of some of these other teams as well. So I do think Notre Dame, I think they're comfortably in the field right now, but the more you think about it, if strength of schedule is the ultimate barometer, they don't have as strong of an argument as some of the teams that might be sitting right in front of them. So 2 losses against 1 loss, I don't know. Do you go to the judges and do you say, well, Ole Miss played the weakest strength of schedule, so they're out with 1 loss? I have a hard time believing that. So it could get chaotic for sure, and I would hate to be the SEC team that lost 2 games and was left out of the playoff when in reality I'm probably one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the country.
No, so the games matter, right? So that's what we're saying. So that's why I want to transition here and to ask you about Narduzzi's comments about, hey, we don't care if Notre Dame beats us 103 to 110 or, to 10. How does that help not only Pittsburgh, but the perception of the ACC, just coming out and saying that?
Well, and it's a big storyline. It's a big topic of conversation. But having lived in the locker room, having been in a facility for 5 years, we never talked about, quote, making the playoff. Your goals as a team are always to beat your rival and win your conference. In that order. Beat your rival is your number 1 goal because that's the goal that's always there. It's always there for the taking. Even if every other game goes sideways, you beat your rival, you can still feel not good about your season, but you feel better about your season. So beat your rival and then win your conference. So basically what Pat Narduzzi is saying is like, we're not talking about the playoff at this point. We're not worried about the playoff at this point. Our goal is to win the ACC. And if we win the ACC, then we're right where we need to be. And they are in control of their own destiny in a roundabout way because they go to Georgia Tech and they have Miami that comes to them. So I think people are reading way too much into this. It's basically him acknowledging what their preseason goal was inside the locker room, inside the Pitt facility, was to win their conference. And if you win your conference, everything else will take care of itself. So I think, look, it's great to have an opportunity to play against a big-time opponent. But of the 3 games remaining on Pitt's schedule, this is the 3rd most important. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think in reality, that is fact.
Okay, but in the whole show beforehand and on SportsCenter, you guys were talking about how the fact that the ACC might get jumped by James Madison, who might be 12-1 with a strength of schedule of 115. Like, that can't really happen, right? Even if like the ACC, if Pitt falls out, but it's Virginia and Duke, like they would make it in over that because they would be a Power 4 conference champion, right? I know like there's a lot of things that would have to happen, but that can't really happen, right?
Yeah, it can happen. Like, I think that's a real possibility. I mean, honestly, if Duke, who, by the way, controls their own destiny right now in the ACC, they play Virginia this weekend. If they are a favorite in that game, by the way, if they beat Virginia, that makes them 6-4. They also have an opportunity to finish the regular season 8-4. That would get them into the ACC title game. Georgia Tech right now and Duke are the 2 teams that control their own destiny. And if they win out, they're in. So you can also say Pitt controls their own destiny too. Why? Because Pitt plays Georgia Tech. So Pitt, if they beat Georgia Tech, they now have the inside track to make it to Charlotte to play in the ACC title game. So yes, this is a real possibility because Duke is sitting there with a loss to UConn this past weekend with 3 non-conference losses, several of which not impressive non-conference losses. And they got run out of the gym by Illinois. Like, it has not been a great year in the non-conference for Duke. So if they win the league and you have a 9-4 conference champion, even if they have a really good win against whoever they play in the ACC title game, there is a possibility. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying it's possible that James Madison sitting at 12-1 with impressive game control, with impressive eye test, however, not with a very impressive strength of schedule, but could strengthen in the event in which they play some good teams in the Sun Belt Championship, that could vault them over the top. So I still think the ACC, in all likelihood, their champion will be in, but it's not a guarantee at this point.
All right, how about this? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's more of a guarantee that the AAC champion gets in over the ACC champion. That's how crazy the league is right now. And the actual analytics support that. There is an 84% chance that the AAC champion makes the college football playoff, whereas there's only a 74% chance that an ACC champion makes the playoff. So still high chance, high probability, but not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination.
All right, because the highest ranked ACC team is Miami, right? And they're 7th in the ACC right now. Is it better for Miami to finish 10-2 and not play in the ACC Championship and maybe get an at-large bid over the ACC Champion? Do you think something like that could happen?
Yes, that's absolutely possible. And with the move tonight, it actually opened up that possibility. Because if you were to ask me last week after the show, say, hey, all right, Miami's sitting at 18. Do you think there's any chance of them being able to climb their way in? I said, no, absolutely not. I don't see it unless chaos happens in front of them. Well, chaos happened this past weekend with Louisville's result and with Virginia's result. So 2 now are out of the way. They're in the rearview mirror. Miami still has a really good win against Notre Dame, and they have a good win, a convincing win against a newly ranked UCF football team that's ranked at 24. So they have 2 wins against teams that are currently ranked in the top 25. And what would be frustrating if I were Louisville, for example, I would sit there and say, well, hang on a second. We beat Pitt. We also beat Miami. So we have 2 wins ranked against teams in the top 25 as well. Why aren't we getting the benefit of the doubt? So if I'm Louisville tonight, I am ticked off. I am really ticked off with what the committee gave us. And I understand it. I understand it completely. But in what right now, in evaluating the ACC, I feel like the committee is basically saying all these teams are flawed. Who's the team that would give me the best chance of being competitive if they made the college football playoff field? And based on what we've seen from the high side of Miami, it's the Hurricanes. But the low side leaves them vulnerable to losing to anybody. So I think Miami's in a great spot right now, frankly, because there's not going to be chalk that flies. Tennessee can absolutely beat Vanderbilt. Utah can definitely lose one down the stretch. BYU is likely to lose at least one more. Oklahoma and Texas sit as a dog this weekend. Texas sits the dog twice between now and the end of the year. Notre Dame is in a great spot already, but you have the head-to-head against Notre Dame. So if it really becomes about, hey, this team versus this team, that could be the one area that could force Miami into the field as a not-large team. So, yeah, I think Miami's very much alive, which I would never have thought that a week ago today.
All right, you mentioned BYU. You think they might lose one, but what if they don't? And what if they come back in the Big 12 championship and beat Texas Tech? Okay, is that 2 teams in the Big 12 that'll get in, or is it going to be winner take all?
No, I think it could be 2 teams in the Big 12 in that scenario, because Texas Tech, I think, has really impressed the committee. You look at their game control, you look at their metrics, they're undefeated when their starting quarterback plays. Even the game they lost, it was on the road against a pretty good Arizona State team who's 6-3, and they had that game on their racket before a pretty miraculous drive by Sam Leavitt to go and steal it. So I think looking at all the things in the Big 12 right now, I think they are very much alive. Now, I do not feel confident in BYU running the table. I do feel confident, however, in BYU possibly getting a win this week in bounce back fashion against TCU. I feel pretty good about them going on the road to Cincinnati. I think they match up well in that game, but I don't love the matchup against Texas Tech. I didn't like it last week, and I won't like it again in the Big 12 title game. So, yes, is it possible? Sure. But right now, if you were to tell me, all right, BYU runs the table the rest of the way, it's not something that I'd feel real confident in.
All right, Greg, started with the SEC, ending with the SEC here. Talking about Texas, it's fun to talk about the potential of these teams winning 10 games, but in all likelihood, Texas is losing to Georgia this weekend. But are they dead if that happens? I think it was 31% on the odds there on the ranking show tonight if they only lose to Georgia. So if they were to beat A&M to end the year, what do you think Texas needs to potentially get in as a 9-3 team, and which 2 lost teams could Texas be valued over when all is said and done here?
It's a great question. I think Texas would be in a really good spot if they were to lose this weekend close. We've already seen the committee reward close losses. We've seen that already this year. If they were to lose close this weekend, or if they were to lose close against Texas A&M, either one, close loss, field goal at the buzzer, then I think Texas would have a pretty strong argument. They would be measured against a 2-loss Notre Dame team. They would be measured against potentially a 3-loss Oklahoma team or 2-loss Oklahoma team, but they have the head-to-head there, and the metrics are comparable, come from the same league. And then you would have to just kind of hope for some chaos and for some other teams that have 2 losses to be measured against them. Because if you look at Texas, they do have an argument that can be made. They can say, well, we could have played Powder Puffs in the non-conference. If we wanted to play Powder Puffs in the non-conference, we would be in a great spot. We'd be sitting here at 10-2, and we'd make the playoff. Instead, we decided to go on the road and play in Columbus. And you guys are going to hold that one game against us when being measured against these other teams. Yes, we lost to Florida. It wasn't good. Yes, we lost a close one to either Georgia or Texas A&M. Not good. But we at least challenge ourselves, whereas teams like Indiana played nobody in the non-conference. Teams like Ole Miss played nobody in the non-conference. Teams like Texas Tech played nobody in the non-conference. So it's not all their fault, I guess. But at the end of the day, I think it's a tough spot to be in. It's a very tough spot to be in because Texas did challenge themselves, and they could potentially be one spot short in the event in which they lose one of these next 2 big games. Okay, you guys also have submitted a ton of tweets, and we really appreciate y'all's contributions to the show. Let's go to Los at Lamar Jr. 114. Shouldn't this projection have Georgia Tech instead of Miami, considering Georgia Tech is atop the ACC standings? I understand Miami is ranked higher, but that's not how it would work on Selection Sunday, since Georgia Tech would be the conference champ. All that's possible, all that's fair, all that's reasonable. Here's the thing about Georgia Tech's current candidacy. They still have a game against Georgia sitting right in front of them. Their strength of schedule right now at this instant, and this is what the committee is tasked to do. They are supposed to take a 30,000-foot snapshot of the college football landscape. Just imagine them sitting up there in outer space and taking a snapshot of what's been accomplished up to this point. Well, their strength of schedule is way beneath that of what Miami's put forth. So it's understandable they sit right behind them. Now, how much will that adjust in the event in which they beat Georgia? Massively. But if they lose to Georgia, it still strengthens their non-conference. It still strengthens their strength of schedule. Even if they lose, it still strengthens their strength of schedule, which might actually, even in a losing effort, if they lose close, it might give them enough to move in front of Miami. So I don't think that's settled right now. I just think the ACC is very much up in the air because last weekend's results were so chaotic. We'll go next to Michael Anand. Michael L. Anand 01. Georgia Tech should be the highest ranked ACC team. BYU should be ranked ahead of OU and Texas, in my opinion. I disagree. I think BYU is very good. I think BYU has a lot to be proud of, and they've been very, very solid all season long. But last weekend was a hard thing to unsee. That was a lot to a little. And if you watch the game, it was not competitive at all. There was not one moment of that game in which you thought BYU was going to win it from start to finish. And they made a couple self-inflicted mistakes, but they couldn't run the ball. What BYU does best is run the ball. And they struggled offensively kind of across the board. So I look at that game. I think it's a hard one to wrap your head around. Their strength of schedule is solid at 28, but it's nowhere near what you're getting with Texas right now. Texas is right now 13 in strength of schedule. Oklahoma right now is 16 in strength of schedule. So they're 12, 13 spots below them. I disagree with BYU sitting right in front of them, especially given how non-competitive that game was against the Red Raiders. We'll go to Ears Whitworth. How far will Alabama fall if they lose to Oklahoma? We talked about this a little earlier. I could see Alabama and Oklahoma being ranked 7, 8, 9. I don't know exactly how it all fall, but would the committee in that scenario value head-to-head? That's something worth watching. Because if Georgia wins and Texas loses, well, Texas is now out. Oklahoma would clearly vault up. How far would they vault up? Would they vault up in front of Notre Dame? Probably. Would Alabama fall down, stay in front of Notre Dame? Probably. Where is Oregon in this mix? Is Oregon in front of those two teams, or are they behind those two teams? My guess they'd probably be behind those two teams based on what's accomplished up to this point. So I think you could probably see a situation where Oklahoma's sitting at 7, Bama probably at 8 in that vicinity, because then you also have the head-to-head between Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Alabama, all there kind of convoluted between 6, 7, 8 in that vicinity. Let's go to Ondo the Tank. People keep talking about the eye test. Indiana, more impressive win because they almost lost. Would it have served A&M better to barely beat Missouri on a last-second miracle? What is the benefit of scheduling and beating Notre Dame when Indiana plays nobody out of conference? I understand the frustration. We already kind of talked about this a little bit. I think the committee took a lot of stock and put it into the fact that A&M beat Missouri, albeit a ranked Missouri, without their starting quarterback. Indiana, meanwhile, goes on the road without their left tackle, without their left guard, and without their top receiver, and they still beat a football team that started the season early in the year and still has talent on the roster. So I think it was more circumstantial than it is anything else. I would have had A&M at 2, but I can understand why the committee decided to keep them at 3 based on what they told us about playing against Matt Zollers as opposed to playing against Bo Pribula. If he was 100% healthy and Missouri was at full strength, maybe they would have gotten a little more credit for that win. We'll go next to Michael Morgan. Georgia Tech should be in because they are number 1 in the ACC. People are way too worried about number 1 in the ACC right now because, frankly, a lot of these ACC grades are incomplete. I mean, some teams in bloated conferences with 17 teams in the conference, 16 teams in the SEC, 18 teams in the Big Ten. Not all conference schedules are created equal. So you might ultimately have the best schedule and the best record in your conference. It doesn't necessarily mean you should be the highest ranked team. Does that make sense? I think when you look at it, yes, if you look at Georgia Tech's path, it's been really favorable. Right now, let's look at Georgia Tech's best moments this season. They beat Wake Forest and needed a penalty to beat Wake Forest. And they beat a 5-4 Duke team. Nothing wrong with that. They beat a 4-5 Clemson team. They beat a 3-6 Virginia Tech team. All that's impressive. But if we're really getting in the weeds, the conference schedule that Louisville's played and won is maybe even more impressive. They beat Miami and they beat Pitt. Both teams are in conference. So, yes, Georgia Tech is first in the league right now, and they control their own destiny. That's all they need to worry about. But I don't think because they're sitting atop the standings means they should be sitting in the top of the rankings relative to the other ACC teams are being measured against. Let's go next to Ty Simpson as my QB. I'd put A&M in front of Indiana. We already kind of talked about that. I don't disagree with you. I think both teams have a compelling argument to make it 2. But I probably lean just ever so slightly towards A&M. I just think they're a little more complete, but I also give credit, very much credit, to Indiana winning when they were not at 100%. We'll go next to Michael R. Why is Alabama not number 1 with their strength of schedule, even though they have a loss from week 1 at Florida State? Because right now, Alabama's strength of schedule, while difficult, is not outrageous relative to what we're seeing from some of the teams sitting right in front of them. They have played the 6th ranked strength of schedule. It's remarkably impressive, having beat Georgia, Vandy. Tennessee is ranked in the top 25. 3 top 25 wins. They deserve a lot of credit for that. They also played 2 Power 5 teams out of conference, which I think the committee put some stake into, even though Wisconsin hasn't lived up there into the bargain. They're sitting there at 3-6, and Florida State certainly hasn't lived up there end either. So looking at Alabama, yes, very tough strength of schedule, but is it tougher than what Texas A&M has played up to this point? Sure, yes, by about 9 spots. So it's enough, but to jump A&M, probably not. Then you look at what Indiana's done with their game control sitting at number 2, the strength of schedule sitting at number 33, their strength of record sitting at number 2. They've accomplished a lot with what they've had to navigate through. Even though the schedule has not been outrageously difficult, they still have 5 wins, against teams that are 6-3 or better. Iowa, Illinois, Oregon, and then 2 teams from the G5 and ODU and Kennesaw State. Both those teams sit at 6-3 or better. Kennesaw State is 7-2. Then Ohio State, I think they're just going off the eye test there. Ohio State has metrics that support them from a game control standpoint, but not a lot of metrics that support them from a strength of schedule standpoint. They've dominated everybody, though, and you got to watch them play and just tip your cap, because that's a team that I think takes a backseat to nobody based on what we've seen in the first 12 weeks of college football season. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. We appreciate all of you guys for supporting the show, for submitting questions to the show. We'll be back again next week to answer all your questions surrounding week 3 of the college football playoff rankings release. We also look forward to seeing you guys on Sunday, where we will break down all the incredible outcomes from this past Saturday, or this upcoming Saturday's outcomes. A lot of big games, a lot of things to be excited about here as we hit the home stretch of the college football season. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, intern Sam, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.